Well, hello and welcome to this special broadcast with me, Ashmit Kumar, right here on CNBC-TV18. Now, I'm in conversation with a man who's considered to be an icon in the world of technology, one of the most influential men, a man whose actions, whose thoughts quite literally decide what the technology of future may look like for you and I. I'm joined by Mr. Werner Vogels, the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer at Amazon. Mr. Vogels, thank you so much for joining us. We'll try to take a glimpse at the future, at what it looks like from the benefit of your lens. But before we get into that, the little bit research that I could do ahead of this told me that you're a t-shirt and sneakers kind of guy. I find you here in traditional Indian attire. Are you comfortable? Are you liking it?
More than that. I love traditional Indian attire. You know, I've been now here for 2.5 weeks. And in most meetings, I show up in Indian attire. I mean, I love kurtas, for example, and they're ideal. It's just that if you wear them outside of India, people look at you like cultural appropriation. That's not good. But I love Indian clothing, and as such, it also shows a little bit of respect for the culture here.
Well, I saw a picture of yours wearing an orange kurta. It looked quite dashing. So, but you never had Mr. Jeff Bezos come up to you and ask you, Werner, what's up? Why aren't you wearing a proper suit? Why wear a pair of sneakers?
No, I think as always, it's the kind of work that you do, the kind of things that come out of your hands. And I think at Amazon we always believe in authenticity. You have to be yourself, because then you can make an impact. Don't try and make me into someone else. Yeah, I've been now Amazon CTO for the past 20 years. Yeah. So, and actually, I remember one photo of Jeff here in India where he's leaning outside the truck when we launched Amazon India, where he's wearing a kurta as well. So, you know, I'm not the only one who actually enjoys Indian clothing.
That's good to hear. Let's dive into the world of technology. Let's talk. I think one aspect that has dominated conversations in tech for the last 24 months has been AI. We've heard about AI. We've heard about Gen AI as well. We'll come to that in just a bit. But in your conversations earlier, you've referred to culturally aware AI. Tell us what that is. What is culturally aware AI?
They're trained on Western data sets. Definitely in the beginning, they were trained on something called Common Core, which was 80% American. I think we need to be really careful in all of our work to make sure that we don't lose the cultural heritage that we have in many different areas. Definitely here in India, for example, it's obvious. Your cultural heritage is not just decades, it is centuries and centuries, maybe so much more than that even. We can't lose that by actually using Western LLMs only. India is a little bit more difficult always. You know, sometimes people don't understand how enormously big this country is and how many people live here and how many different languages are being spoken here. And definitely, cultures in northern India are quite different from the cultures in Kerala or over in Madras. And as such, you need to make sure that these models do not lose the culture that is actually embedded in these words.
Again, while researching for this conversation, I came across an interview that you'd given to John Thornbill of Financial Times. And this was 5 years back. This is pre-COVID. This is 2019 that I'm talking about. And you had showed up at the interview wearing a t-shirt that said, encrypt everything. At the time, John had asked you the question that how feasible is it going forward, given as how the governments are seeking access. They're seeking some form of a backdoor entry. We've seen recent government initiatives as well across Europe, US, India, where they're looking to get that backdoor access. So I ask you again, 5 years later, is it possible to encrypt everything? Is it feasible with the government regulation in place?
You mean with backdoors?
With the government seeking those backdoors, whether or not the industry provides...
If there's backdoors and encryption becomes useless. Don't think that, you know, whoever you share the keys with has access to your data. Keys are something else that you need to protect. And actually, it's almost the only tool we have to make sure that you can guarantee that you're the only one who has access to this particular data. And who you give the keys to also has access to your data. So if governments would want access to this data, they should go to the customer, that is, who owns the keys, and ask them for the keys. Because if you have backdoors in encryption, encryption becomes useless. Believe me, the government being able to hold secrets, that's not necessarily, let's say, proven by history to be such a strong statement. I believe backdoors will render encryption unusable or ineffective.
Sure.
Let's put it like that. If one group has access to a backdoor, then others will gain access to that as well. We know that from the past. But I do not think there's anything wrong with asking customers for their keys as the government. Yeah, after all, we have strict legal guidelines in place for that. Subpoenas, judges reviewing subpoenas, and as such, you know, or just go talk to your customer. I'm pretty sure that if there is a suspicion, for example, with a particular customer, that they have, maybe that's on platform and someone may be sharing child sexual abuse material on that. I'm pretty sure if you go to the customer and ask them for the keys, they will be more than happy to give you to prove it that it's not the case. Or that it is the case and that they want to take action on it. Yeah? And as such, this becomes a conversation between the owner of the data, the customer, and the government. I never want to be in that position, in between. Yeah? And still, encryption is the only tool we have to ensure that our customers are the only one who can access that data.
So encrypt everything, you still stand by that?
Absolutely. It is like, what was it? Dance like nobody is watching, encrypt as if everyone is.
That's an interesting quotation, I'll remember that. Let's move ahead now. Let's talk about one of the aspects that you had alluded to in the very first answer, which is that some of the other LLMs that are capturing headlines in recent memory, whether that's Microsoft-backed OpenAI, that Google has Gemini. You mentioned and you sought to bring a distinction that that's not the strategy that Amazon is following. Amazon is more of a B2B business service provider. Tell us, can we expect any initiatives in that direction from Amazon in the coming days? We heard in 2023 about an Alexa-powered LLM. Is that something that's on the cards?
Yeah, that's absolutely. Of course, you know, we're continuously looking to improve any of our services. But we're in general applying that. Alexa will definitely have sort of more capabilities over time that are driven by any advances in AI. Of course, we've been a long-time player in the AI world, but we don't play in the same world as some of these other large companies that you've heard from, because we're a business-to-business company. Yeah? We build technology such that our customers can build these chatbots or these AI interfaces, or use AI for their systems. And as such, we play a very different role in it. We don't play this role open outside in the media with this one model over that one model over that one model. We are really concerned much more about security, about safety, about putting guardrails in place such that these models don't generate data that you cannot rely on. How these models can be trained together with data from our customers themselves. Technology, after all, is only useful in context of what you do with it for your customers. And that's where we are at. We want to make sure we have the broadest platform possible where customers have choice and where they can experiment and have a sandbox where they can play in, so that to understand how can this technology really help me. A great example there is in healthcare. I have seen using various versions of AI from the past, image recognition, things like that, that have been extremely effective in healthcare. And one of them can be just describing documents. Don't know if you've ever seen the handwriting of a doctor. They're not necessarily legible, yeah, but turning that into a digital document that is legible is a whole different story. AI can do these things quite well. But even in the diagnosis version, after all, I have a history in radiology. And one of the things that I've seen recently is there is a study in Sweden where, in Sweden there's a national healthcare program that allows women over 50 to have a mammogram every 2 years to see whether early detection of breast cancer. Now, a radiologist looks at those images, but sees thousands of these images a day. At the end of the day, his eyes aren't that good anymore. Turns out you can build a simple AI system for that detects 30% more cancers than an individual radiologist and is as good as 2 radiologists. So, and that's just the beginning. Those areas are really where we need to be able to apply this technology very simply, it doesn't need to be a large language model underneath there. Because remember, these larger models are not necessarily the most sustainable in the world. Now, we're working really hard on that through hardware and software practices, but as always, when you use technology, you also need to figure, you need to keep in mind, what am I doing in terms of sustainability? How much energy is this using?
Sure.
Yeah, this 700 billion parameter model may be more expensive, not only in terms of cost, but also in terms of resources use. And I think...
So you're saying there's a better allocation of resources outside of LLMs?
Whether it's outside of LLM or a smaller model, but you should experiment with that.
Interesting.
Yeah? See whether you can get accurate answers, the accurate answers that you're looking for,
Sure.
with the lowest cost and the lowest impact on the planet.
Sure.
After all, I think we have a responsibility to that. I think at Amazon we have these leadership principles that we all live by, and one of them is, with success and scale comes broad responsibility. It's not only our responsibility to build the next best spam filter or to advise you the best book, we also are responsible for making sure that this is in the most sustainable way possible.
I'm running out of time, but I'll just raise two more questions with you. I'm speaking to you from an interesting perspective. You're coming from Europe, you're from Netherlands. I just want to get a sense that as the governments, they stack up regulations. We've seen the European example where we've seen some very strong arm regulations. So whether that's the GDPR, the Digital Markets Act, or the most recent AI Act, there are concerns being raised as to what it does to innovation. So as a tech guy, if you were to look at a new emerging market such as India, what would your advice be to the regulators here, learning from the European example?
Well, I think if we look to the past, and not only through technology, what are the areas that we've regulated? We've regulated areas, we as in society, we've regulated areas where the risks of misuse are significant. Healthcare, financial services, those kind of areas. Yeah? And as such, I think if we talk about new technologies, we should address the risks in those areas that we've always considered, where the risks, if technology is misused, the risks are significant.
Sure.
There are lots of areas where the risks are not significant. Yeah? And as such, we should make sure that in those areas, innovation can run free. We can continue. There's all these young, brilliant minds, especially here in India. I mean, if you look, I think since I was here last time, I've seen a 4x increase in the number of young businesses, where enormous innovation is happening, and whether that is in, flash deliveries all the way over to electric motorcycles, there is so much immense innovation going on. We should make sure that those areas where we have been regulating in the past because we saw risks continue. Are there lots of risks in and around electric motorcycles? Yes, of course. And as such, we had regulations in that in the past. If we use AI to design these models, the regulation should still be addressing those. But, what kind of advice we give you, which book you should buy, I'm not really sure whether that should be regulated. So make sure that the regulations focus on those areas where the risks are the highest. And I think in the recent AI Act in Europe, for example, that's pretty good encoded. Yeah? The areas that used to be riskful, let's make sure that we keep tight control over that. And let's make sure we can innovate in other areas. Also means that educating the regulator and educate the politicians to make sure that they can make sound decisions instead of just knee-jerk reactions, which will happen often. I think we've seen enough protectionism happen in and around the world in countries. We need to make sure that this doesn't happen. The same thing doesn't happen around technology, and for that we need to make sure that regulators, governments, politicians are educated at that particular level. I often meet regulators or politicians, and then I see that they're just politicians and lawyers, not necessarily technologists. And as such, making sure that they're educated and understanding the technology is crucial in all of this.
We're completely out of time, but I'll just take out 2 more minutes. Given that you're with us, help us gaze into the crystal ball and tell us what the technology of future looks like. We've discussed so many elements. In a few words, if you could capture for us what the technology of future of 2025, your tech predictions.
Oh, no, first of all, I'm not going to tell you my tech predictions because that will be a whole other segment. I can't do that in 2 minutes. I do think if I have to pick one area, I think healthcare. Yeah, and I'm passionate about healthcare. I also think we have a lot of problems to solve in this world. Yeah, healthcare definitely one of them. If you look at the United Nations Sustainability Goals, we expect that by 2050 there's another 2 billion people on this planet. How can we make sure that they have an economic future, that there's healthcare for them? How can we make sure that we can feed them? Yeah? For that, we can't just rely on governments to solve this for us, because that won't happen. Yeah? It's us as technologists that have an enormous role to play into this. And I see that across the world. Now, you know, where young businesses are actually starting to become really passionate about solving these hard problems. But solving, I mean, look at what has happened here in India, where the government has stepped in, but that's a unique scenario. If you look at Indonesia, there's a young company called Hara. So smallholder farmers in Indonesia don't have an identity. It means they can't get a loan to buy seeds. They have to go to a loan shark, 40, 50% interest. Half of their crop is gone before they even planted it. And what this young company does, it gives its farmers an identity, measures their plot of land and the yield of that plot of land. That data together suddenly becomes extremely interesting for banks, because there's a 100% repay rate on those loans. These are young businesses that are solving really hard problems. And I think if there's an area where technology has to play a role in, is in solving these hard problems. Yes, of course, we can use technology to build the next smart spam filter. It's very useful. But I think there's much harder problems to solve in this world. And I think we should be looking towards younger generations, and definitely younger generations of entrepreneurs, to solve these problems.
Mr. Vogels, it's been an engaging few minutes with you, learning in terms of what the technology of today looks like, and perhaps glancing at what it may look like in the road ahead in the future. Mr. Vogels, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking our time.
It's my pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.